A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Jessica Lankard-Frost, Policy Officer at NAP. It's my pleasure to be chairing today's event on emerging trends in local government finance. Firstly, I'd like to quickly run through a few housekeeping announcements, some of which are currently up on the screen. Do use the Q&A function throughout the event to put questions to our speakers, and the chat function to interact with your fellow delegates and to share any information or links. If you require any technical support, please do post in the chat. My NAP colleagues will try their best to help. The closed caption feature, subtitles, can be accessed by all attendees at any time during today's event. For desktop laptop users, to turn on closed captions, please select Show Captions. The button will be labelled CC. If the button is not visible, please select the three dots on the bottom right corner of the screen. Then, please select Captions. After that, you'll be prompted to click Show Captions, so please select this option. If you are using a mobile device or tablet, please scroll across the menu on the bottom of your screen and select Captions. You will then need to click Show Captions. Once the captions are on, you can access a live transcription of the event. If you have selected the closed caption feature, please use the Reactions feature, the next button on the right of the closed caption feature, by ticking the Yes button, green emoji with a tick, to show us that the closed captions are working at your end. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, please contact NAP support via the chat and we will endeavour to rectify the issue. After today's event, we will send the presentation slides used today, the chat, and any other useful information. And we will also be inviting your feedback on today's event. So please do look out for the feedback form, which should pop up on your screens following the conclusion of the webinar. Now, NAP would like to thank its partners, Clear Councils Insurance, CCLA, and Blushare Illuminations for their extensive support for NAP's online events. So, as local government grapples with unprecedented financial challenges, with some principal authorities facing administration, engaging in a discourse that focuses on fortifying economic resilience in the strategic planning of local councils is imperative. This event will showcase a panel of finance experts with extensive local government experience, offering insight into the shared financial risks confronting local councils and principal authorities. Today is a chance to gain practical knowledge on safeguarding local councils from prevalent financial threats anticipated to impact local government in the years ahead. So, I'm thrilled to be joined today by a brilliant panel of speakers. Steve Parkinson, partner at the Parkinson Partnership. Derek Kemp, NAP's Council and Audit Advisor. Annie Child, Chief Executive at Small Authorities Audit Appointments. And Councillor Graham Oakes, Leader of Yeovil Town Council. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to Steve. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone, as well. Just bear with me. Right. Okay, there's a number of trends I'd want to talk about. Jessica's already kind of highlighted probably the most significant one we've seen, which is people running out of money, councils running out of money. We've seen it particularly at principal authority level for different reasons. We've seen Birmingham primarily driven by pay policies many years ago, with some risk investments in things like solar farms and things, some of which I think it's slightly dubious as to whether they actually existed. Woking, who have been borrowing for assets, and Slough as another example where it was simply poor budgeting in past years. Things had been failed to be included and stuff, and they've got into difficulties, not got enough money to deliver their own services and so on. It's not just in the principal authority sector, though. We've had one parish council named in Parliament for being unable to pay its staff on a monthly basis, not just as a one-off. We've had another that appears to have run out of money after losing a legal case, which they were perhaps unwise to have got involved in and started. And we are seeing a few councils actually burning through their reserves to try and postpone the inevitable council tax increase that's going to follow once they run out of those reserves. So people running out of money, local authorities running out of money is a disturbing trend that we're seeing. And it does seem to be driven by risk taking with other people's money, accompanied by some weak decision making and people not being prepared to make those difficult decisions about stopping things or changing things in the way they do it. So a consequence of that is that we're seeing parishes trying to replace principal authority services wholesale, regardless of the costs. And that's not really a sustainable approach for parishes. So they need to guard against it by making sure they've got sound budgets in place, strong reserves, tight spending controls, and particularly sufficient staff resources to do the kind of things that they're trying to do. We are seeing the opposite trend, though, very much. We are seeing a lot of money coming into the local council sector. We are seeing big government funding. We're seeing town deal funding, community ownership funding, community infrastructure levy is really kind of taking off in some places, as well as the traditional routes like Sport England, Football Foundation, Heritage Lottery funding, and so on. We are seeing big projects, and I'm talking kind of 10, 15 million pound projects, which we didn't see in the local council sector a few years ago. We've got big projects in Camborne, Felixstowe, and Bridgewater, for example, at that sort of level where they're completely reconfiguring some historic buildings and so on. And a follow-on from that as a trend is we are seeing more complex projects rather than a simple hall for hire. We are seeing multifunctional buildings that may involve the principal authority services, may involve health services, police, charities, sports groups, often with a range of different funders, different occupiers of the buildings, sometimes different landowners being involved, or different leaseholders of the resulting facilities. And this can give a better result for residents because everything's in one place. It means you don't have a proliferation of underutilized buildings. But those kind of projects create more complex issues around asset ownership, VAT reclaims, business rates, and the long-term liability of looking after those assets. So certainly, I think a key message is getting the right advice at the start, making sure legal agreements are sound and that they are actually signed, which seems to be a common failing from the 90s and early 2000s. People spent a lot of time drafting legal agreements and they were never actually signed and wouldn't stand up in court. But all those things are essential to avoid very expensive mistakes when you're doing a really big project. We are seeing a slight trend towards things being funding led. They're being driven by the fact that there's money to do something rather than there's a big demand for that thing. There's a danger there that people are building a non-essential thing because there's some funding. And in some cases, that can lead to an underused, rather expensive white elephant. There's also the danger that the ongoing costs of that new building or whatever it is affects the council's ability to deliver its other services. So it's really important councils are aware of vanity projects and don't do things just because it looks good and focus on it being needed by the community. And I think as a final trend, the thing we're seeing is more revenue generation, income coming from things like car parking, ticketed events, rents of buildings, room hire, even though 2020 showed us the risks of relying on variable income sources, which can be affected by all kinds of factors. We had it with COVID, but they're also weather dependent. If we get a wet summer, it can impact on your car parking, beachfront activities and things like that. We are seeing higher interest rates where we're looking at interest rates more like 5% rather than 0.5 or even 0.05%, which we had 2 or 3 years ago, giving a financial nudge for some councils that have maintained healthy reserves. But the corollary is also true. If councils burn off their reserves on trying to keep the precept down, they also lose the interest that they would get from those reserves as well. So it's important that you think about the consequences of those kind of decisions as we're going along. So that's certainly some of the trends we're seeing. I'm keen to see what kind of people questions have got about where we are going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Now over to you, Derek.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Steve has referred in several instances to the level of reserves, burning through reserves, the implication of reserves. And I think it's important to realise that every time a council takes on a new service, that has a direct implication on the necessary level of reserves that the council needs. Because services cost money and reserves are necessary to fund that cost of money, particularly where income is expected to be generated but doesn't necessarily follow immediately. The practitioner's guide is the Bible in terms of determining how your reserves should be set, what reserves policy you should have, what level your reserves should be at. And it is important that all spending decisions incorporate decisions around implications for reserves. Running out of reserves means running out of money. Running out of money leads to the horror stories that we've heard from Steve and from our principal authority brethren. And we need to ensure that at our level of local government, our funding decisions are based on sound policies and sound principles. And that is an overriding requirement. That's all I want to say at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Derek. And now over to you, Annie.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm just going to share my screen. I've got some slides to show. Let's see if this works. Here we go. So this morning, this afternoon, I wanted to take the opportunity to quickly introduce SAAA to you, the smaller authorities audit appointments, talk about what we do, give some insight into the sector, contrast what we do with the principal authorities, and then briefly talk about the areas that are of interest to SAAA, which I think would be of interest to the councils too. So if I click on, here we go. So this is a slide which shows SAAA's purpose. We are a sector-led limited company appointed by what was then DCLG as a specified person to procure and appoint external auditors, set out the functions performed in legislation, and monitor delivery of ongoing audit contracts. So we are a company that has been set up, and that is our key tasks. We are composed of a board of 8 members. 3 of those members are are called member directors. They are the member bodies, which is SLCC now and the Association of Drainage Authorities. And they are joined by 5 independent directors, many of whom have a long and deep experience of working in the local government sector. So we have a strong board. The staff team is myself as chief exec. I'm formerly a town clerk, and I'm joined recently by Joanne McCullum, who is a part-time RFO at a parish council, who acts as our corporate services manager. So we're a very small body, and we are supported by contractors to help us get the job done. Our key partners, the people we work with most closely, are now ADA and SLC, as you would expect, but then the PSAA, which is the Public Sector Audits Appointment, which is the equivalent body, but for the larger authorities, fire, police, and so forth. The National Audit Office, the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, the FRC, which is the Financial Reporting Council, and the emerging Internal Audit Forum. And of course, you will all probably be aware at least of one of the 4 of our audit firm partners, Moore, Mazars, PKF, Littlejohn, and BDO. Those are the people who conduct the external audits for this smaller authority sector. So the smaller authority sector, here's some numbers about it in 22-23. There was just under 10,000 authorities under £6.5 million that can levy a precept. That's the definition of a smaller authority. Of those, just over 8,000 were local councils. There was 1,266 parish meetings, 112 drainage boards and 33 others, which includes things like charter trustees, cremation boards, harbour boards, and other oddments like that. So that's the scope of the sector. And within that group of smaller authorities, there's different types. Some have no financial transactions, and you'll be familiar with what type you are and what type of AGAR you have to fill in as a consequence. Some authorities are exempt, which means they are spending or incoming less than £25,000 a year. Some are over 25,000 but under 200,000, which means they receive a basic level limited assurance review. Some are over 200,000 and they will receive an intermediate level assurance review. And the tests, how much you are tested, how much you are audited, varies according with your income. And this is set out in the National Audit Office's Auditor Guidance Note 02. And within that, as you go over 2 million, you have additional tests. But those authorities which go over 6.5 million, if they do that for 3 consecutive years, they become a full audit authority. So move out of SAAA's remit and move into the PSA's remit. With all of that entails a really substantial step change in audit type. So the PSSA is our equivalent body, but for the category 1 bodies, that's those over 6.5 million. And they are in a very different position to us. They are experiencing a backlog. They have a large number of open audits. As the slide shows, that as in September, only 5 out of 467 local government audits opinions had been given. So this contrasts very strongly with the SAAA's audit regime, where we aim for 95% of all audit opinions to be concluded by the 30th of September, and we routinely reach that target, where you can see that there is a crisis for the public sector audit appointments. That's that category of body where that target is nowhere near being reached. And this has been the subject of significant interest by the Department of Levelling Up Housing Communities, and has been the subject of recent consultations, which I will refer to a bit later on. I'm going to jump that slide because it doesn't tell you anything interesting. We do report on the results of the work of auditors each year, and this report is available on our website. It gives facts and figures about what's gone on. Some of those facts and figures I've told you already. But one of the key things this year we noted was that not all smaller authorities are meeting the deadline for submission. So we encourage smaller bodies, all the parish councils, to try and hit that target date of the 30th of June. This year, just over 30% of opinions were qualified, which meant they did not fully meet the auditor's statutory requirements. And this is a similar level to previous years, but we are watching this carefully to make sure that there is no decrease in compliance. But this report can be seen on our website. These slides I just put in for interest, which I just think neatly illustrates the impact of COVID. So in the COVID year, which is the year 3 in the centre, there was only 92% of opinions issued that year, which obviously describes the detail that auditors and parish councils had in completing their AGARs and getting them in. But at the same year, the number of PIRs, or public interest reports, peaked as well, which is just what we probably all instinctively know, shown in a diagram. It might be more interest of you what I can say on this slide, which is SAAA's areas of interest. I noted that DLUC and the NAO have recently undertaken a large consultation on the crisis in local government audit, and SAAA responded to both those consultations, and our consultation response is available on our website if you wish to read it. And our consultation response covered some of the items here. These are things which SAAA are looking at, things we are interested in. I have to be clear that we are not a lobbying body. That is specified in our memorandum of understanding with the department. We are not a lobbying body, but these are things we are interested in. We are interested in the £6.5 million threshold. Should it be removed altogether? Should smaller authorities just be regarded as a class of body? That's a question we're looking into, and we're always very keen to hear anybody's views on that. The £25 million lower threshold. If you took inflation into account since the time that threshold was set, the threshold would be worth nearer 40,000. Should we be considering an increase in that? And the chart there shows that over the last 5 years, the percentage of councils, smaller bodies, which are able to declare themselves to be exempt is dropping, which does show that more people, more smaller authorities are being caught in the regime. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? That's what we're interested in understanding. And parish meetings. Is the low limited assurance regime, which is delivered by the AGAR, is that appropriate for parish meetings? Many are very small, don't maintain good contact with the auditors. It's a question mark there. How should they be treated? Derek has mentioned JPAG and the Practitioner's Guide, how that is your Bible. SAAA support that view entirely, and this year we're giving additional funds to NOUT to help them provide better support to JPAG to ensure that the Practitioner's Guide is the very best it can be and useful to all of those who are trying to use it. So we've funded the JPAG with more funds this year, and part of that funding is to review the Practitioner's Guide. We're also looking at the AGAR forms, and some of you may have responded to our consultation we did before Christmas around the digitalisation of these forms. How can we make the process more efficient, less prone to error? What is the appetite for that? And we're taking that forward. From the responses to our survey, that's been generally welcomed. But as we all know, there'll be the devil in the detail, and making sure that people can use these digital forms easily, and that is suitable for all types of parish council and smaller authorities. SAAA is interested in internal audit, the availability and quality of it. Whilst it's not directly in our remit, it forms part of the wider system, and good internal audit is good for accountability and governance across all the smaller authorities. And then SAAA is also looking inwards at its own governance. We're seeking to ensure that we've got all that we need to be doing in place, and that we are building relationships with all the bodies in the sector to ensure that that our views are heard, and that we are hearing other people's views. So I'm delighted to be here today as part of that, to raise the profile of SAAA. Because as we move into discussing all these areas, there is an opportunity to change or modify the legislation that governs the limited assurance review for smaller authorities. And we need everybody's views on that to make it the best review that can be undertaken. So whilst not trying to teach anybody to suck eggs, many of you will be experienced practitioners. Here is my top tips, my 5 top tips for a successful audit. Read the instructions provided by your audit firm. They do provide reams of information. Read the Practitioner's Guide. I don't think that can be said often enough. Submit your forms in plenty of time. Be prepared to answer queries, and keep your contact details up to date. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie. And if anyone has any questions for Annie or Steve or Derek, please do put them in the Q&A box. Now, over to you, Graham.
Yeah, hopefully someone's going to be starting my slides for me, because I don't do technology, so I'm hoping that they're going to miraculously appear. Or is that overly hopeful? With which? Yeah. So, good afternoon. My name is Graham Oakes. I'm the leader of Yeovil Town Council, and straight away you got 2 questions in your mind. Who the heck's Graham Oakes, and where's Yeovil? Well, if you go to Devon and Cornwall on the M5, you come through Somerset. It's a truly beautiful county, and most people just go through it at different speeds on the M5. But if you stop off, there's so many things to do in Somerset. It's a beautiful place. And Yeovil is one of the towns in Somerset. It's the home of British helicopters. the only place that makes helicopters in this country. It's also the home of vaccination, and you can even see King Arthur's Camelot from the Oval. So it's got everything you really need. Famous Yeovilians, Ian Botham and Marley Packer, the rugby player. So quite an exciting place, and it's got a town council. Now the reason I'm here, if we could see the next slide, you'll get a chance to see what an awful person I am. I became the leader in 2019, and you'll notice if you look at the graph, there's a nice steady increase in those years. I think Derek will be pleased because we've been making sure our reserves were well placed, and we were in a strong position. We have a very experienced clerk who's a chartered accountant or something. She's very good at numbers. So we just need to worry about the political stuff, and she makes sure we don't do anything that can financially damage our town. Now, you will notice the last column is, those of you who are good at maths will have figured out it's a 91% increase on the previous year. And that's a massive change, and that's because Somerset Council in November declared a financial emergency. And that's because they looked at their books and found they had a slight problem of £100 million. And a big chunk of that is due to increasing costs of social care. But there's a whole range of factors. The way that Somerset County Council was originally set up, the rateable value, the original council tax levies, a council tax freeze for, I think, 6 years. All these factors have created problems for Somerset Council. And what that means is to avoid going to 144, they've got to lose an awful lot of services. Now, so Somerset, the district council who we had before, invested a lot in, say, Somerset. So we had a range of facilities. And if we move to the next slide, you'll see those facilities we're looking at. So we have a Yeovil Recreation Centre, known as Muddy Rec, for those of us who grew up here. Now, it's got two exciting features, apart from lots of grass. It's got a running track, and that running track is of a very high standard. It's been used for Commonwealth Games trials. And if you want an equivalent track, you have to go up to the Midlands. There's nothing else like it in our area. We've also got a hockey pitch there. Lots of angry residents when we put it in, but it's of a league standard. So it's the highest kind of level you can have for a hockey pitch. So we have regional facilities there in our town. And I have to say, all the kids go up there for their sports days and things. It's widely used. And Somerset Council basically was saying, well, we're going to stop putting any money in at all. And that was a significant problem. You'll also see Westlands Leisure Centre and Octagon Theatre. The Octagon Theatre is a very successful regional theatre, and it attracts people from South Wales and Cornwall, across the region. Very popular mostly for Somerset and Dorset and in our town. That's being closed because it was being refurbished, and we're in a joint project now with Somerset Council, and hopefully spending £15 million. 10 million of that is government money to refurbish that theatre, and that'll be transferred over at the end to be run by the town council. Westlands Leisure Centre is a leisure centre the town council largely got saved, now operated by Somerset Council. We'll be taking that over as well, and that's been providing a lot of the cultural stuff while the Octagon's shut. But a very successful team of staff there who will be tupied across. And the final big area is Yeovil Country Park. And those of us who grew up in Yeovil, well, we used to go courting there in our teens, but it's a beautiful country park right on the edge of town. And I think our visitors are often surprised that we have something so beautiful right in the middle of right next to the middle of the town. So those are the facilities. The bad news is you put all that lot together along with a heritage collection, and you've got over £1 million worth of services that we're taking over. So if we look at the next slide, that was the reason why we had to increase our council tax by 91%. We're now in talks for what they call the second tranche, where we're taking over all the play areas, some of which we already owned, but the rest of them and parks So the council tax will have to go up again next year. I've fully taken board what Derek was saying about the reserves that have to go with that. We have a very cautious approach, believe it or not. You'll see we're the 5th largest increase in Somerset in council tax. Those are the larger parishes in the county, and they vary tremendously. Wells are taking over some toilets, I think. They increased their council tax by 1.9%, whereas Taunton is the largest increase, 172.91%. That actually is largely about the fact that when it was set up, as a council, it's only been open about a year. When it was originally set up, one of the mistakes was made was it didn't really have reserves. Definitely not significant ones. So it's having to financially catch up, and we'll go from there. Yes, and someone's just pointed out Wellington's on there. The reality is these aren't vanity projects coming in from these councils. They're basically rescuing services that were provided by Somerset Council, and in our case before that, South Somerset. I was knocking on doors, as you have to do in elections times because we have by-elections, and the thing that struck me was the general feeling on the doorstep was that the town council had no choice. They couldn't see those vital facilities going down the pan. So if we come to the final slide, you'll be pleased it's the final one. What's going to happen next? So no, it doesn't appear. Here it comes. Here it is. Okay. If you'd asked me a year ago, as leader of the council, would we put up the council tax by 91%? I'd have said no. Would be rerunning all these things? No. In a very, very short space of time, councils across Somerset had to decide how they were going to keep services going. We leave Somerset Council to run, to do the things like the roads and schools and the things they have to do. But the other things that are very important to people's lives, how will that work? One of the problems that was clear that came out of that was Somerset Council did not they told all the parishes there was a problem. What they didn't do was really know the detail of that and the opportunities, shall we say, for us. We stepped forward and we actually asked for things rather than letting them just close. We wanted to get in, TUPE the staff across. So we've been proactive, but most of the parishes, particularly the smaller parishes, have just been left in a slight vacuum of knowledge. So that's created problems. Now, the other thing is, and I'm sure those of you who are involved perhaps as clerks, parish clerks, will know that we know the costs of running the town council very, very accurately. I mean, we have an exceptional clerk and team, and we know literally down to the penny what we're spending. Somerset Council don't. A massive organisation, the biggest business in Somerset, and they simply don't have the details. So when we're asking for the costings behind this, not to mention the fact that a lot of their numbers cover a much wider area than Yeovil, some of the numbers they've given us are estimates, I think is a more accurate figure. So what we're going to do is take over those services and we're going to run them and review the real costs. And we know, if we start from the point of view that we know the Somerset figures are wrong, and then we made sure, because the first year we've only got half-year costs, but we raised the full-year cost on precept, we will have that buffer to find out the real costs, and we will drill down and we'll make sure we get there. We are talking to other councils in two ways. One is asking our neighbouring councils. Yeovil's made up of 3 sort of parishes, and we're asking other councils, the surrounding councils, to help financially contribute, but we'll also be looking to offer support. So that could be that we offer marketing support to the theatres across Somerset, because we've got a brilliant marketing team that's coming across with the Octagon Theatre. It could be grass cutting and things like that for local parishes, because those are services that were previously provided, but will have most of those staff. Lovely question. How can they not know their own costs? Ask any unitary council to show you a budget line that ends in pennies, and it doesn't exist. That's what parish councils do. I mean, literally, we're a bit obsessed with it, but the point is we know where we stand financially. That gives us confidence to take on these services, and that's why over the last 3 or 4 years, knowing there was a tsunami coming, we gradually built up our reserves. The final point is one that is a thing called a community governance review. It's what happened in Taunton. Yeovil was actually made up of 3 big parishes, and 3 or 4 other surrounding parishes were bits in it. Next year, not this year, because we're taking everything, we have to deal with everything, but next year we really do need to start a community governance review, so that all the people who live in Yeovil will actually they'll actually live in Yeovil community council area, whatever we get called. That will make it easier to run. We'll reduce the council tax for some people, increase it for others, but will improve the service we provide to Yeovil residents. And that's the lot.
Many thanks, Graham. And if you have any questions for Graham or any of our other speakers on our panel today, please do continue to put them in the Q&A box. I'll now start taking questions from that box to put to our panelists. So I will start with our first question, which is, how important do you think it is that the sector continues to be outside the referenda or capping regime so it can focus on meeting local needs? Graham, do you want to take that one first?
Well, I think there's a historic point here. Remember that parish councils have a long history of having the free tuppence back in the days of the rates. And I think that there's actually quite a ethical issue about whether parishes should be limited in any way. I'd oppose it, and I'd oppose it because, yes, our council tax went up by essentially 90%. But if you live in a Band E property, as I do, my council tax, that increase was £2.50 a week. Saving local services for the price of half a pint of beer or almost a pint of cider is important. And the government needs to support councils. They hate us. I think they hate all councils. And they need to give us both freedom and cash to provide the services that people want and need.
Great, thank you. Steve, Derek, or Annie, did you want to come in there at all?
I'll come in if I may.
Yeah.
The point's been made quite clearly that we are the safety valve. We are the safety valve for the problems that are not only always of their own making, but that are being experienced by principal authorities. And if we are capped, you're cutting off that safety valve. And we all know what happens when safety valves are cut off. There is an explosion. So I would say cap us at your peril.
Hey, Steve, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, if you take it back to the big level, if there was no referendum principles rather than capping, we wouldn't be in this mess because principal authorities would have been able to put their council tax up. And I take Graham's point, but if Somerset or any other council had been able to have an extra £2 a week from every council taxpayer, they would have been in this situation. So I think that's one of the problems. So essentially what we are seeing is the parish sector is being used as a way of putting people's council tax up generally so that we can try and continue the service ed. Is it important? Of course it is. It's not important. I mean, I did a lot of work on this back in 2016 when the last time the government looked at it. And I think simply because of the kind of size of most parish councils, the cost of trying to do a referendum, going through that process, it will be prohibitive, which means virtually nobody does it. And we do know from principal authority experience, if you do a referendum, which has to say basically, would you like your council tax to go up? Yes is not a common answer when you ask that question. But you know, when you talk to people about what services are important, etc., then yes, they want to see those services being kept. They don't want to see them disappear. So yes, keeping parishes outside of what essentially what will become a very bureaucratic process. And of course, once you're in forever, and then you're limited in terms of what you can do in the future. So yes, very important.
Thank you, Steve. Annie, did you want to come in there?
Just really with a personal view, rather than FAA's view, I think people are right to identify it as a safety valve, and it does improve flexibility of parish councils, and there's plenty of mechanisms still for the local community to hold the parish council to account if it thinks its precept rise is excessive. I speak from personal experience of parish polls, so you know there is still mechanisms there, but I think it should. Parish councils should remain outside of that referendum or capping regime.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, our next question is for Graham. Has the Yeovil Town Council considered setting up a charity to run the assets being transferred?
Yes, it's certainly one of the things we are considering going forward. We haven't had the time to do that.
Apologies, I think Graham may have frozen there. I will move on to another question. So we've got one question that says, I would like some advice on where our town council can invest some of our reserves. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Graham.
There is the position where it's been suggested that we look at a charitable trust of some form, including to create a museum in the town, which we lack, although we've got the things to put in it. And it is something we can look at going forward. But our first priority has got to be to make sure that the staff who work there, will be work for us, go through TUP, and those services continue. And then we'll be reviewing them all to see how we can improve them, including whether there's a case for using a charitable trust.
Great, thank you. So our next question is also for you, Graham. Would you be able to tell us how the leisure centre is doing? This is from someone whose local authority is struggling at the moment due to the climbing costs of running it.
Okay, our leisure centre is it's doing really well. We haven't got the final figures, which is again slightly a difference between this time now and this time next year. I know informally that they've exceeded the budget targets. They've had a successful year. It's been the most successful year since the leisure centre was opened about 5 years ago by the district council. And if you pop in at times, people are going there kind of informally for the coffees and lunches, as well as all the performances we have there. So it's doing well, but the problem with the leisure centre, it's not private. It's owned by Leonardo's, the helicopter people next door. It used to be their social club, and it's leased to Somerset Council. That's coming across to us. There's a break clause coming up in a couple of years' time. We're hoping that Leonardo's will see a long-term future working with us to keep providing this thing. So a little bit of uncertainty, but the way it's set up with the Octagon Theatre, once they're back both operating, the way they operate in tandem, you've got the savings of there's one team that runs it, but also the range of things you put on. So we've got Panto in there this year. It was okay. They need a theatre. They don't need the kind of flat folder stage that Westerns operates. But yeah, it's going really well. Best thing is, why not come to Yeovil and have a look? You'd be very welcome.
Great, thank you. So our next question, I think this will be more for you, Derek and Steve. I would like some advice on where our town council can invest some of our reserves. rather than just ordinary bank accounts. I feel this is a very important issue and there is a distinct lack of advice available. Are either of you able to come in on that?
I think the only comment to say is they're right. Advice is difficult. It is a regulated activity under the Securities of the Markets Act to even suggest in the course of a paid contract that somebody should consider or shouldn't consider any particular sort of investment. So we can't say you should go here or you should go there. There are organisations within the sector that promote themselves widely that provide places for you to deposit your money. I'm going to say no more than that. But it is a challenging one. But let's be fair, bank interest rates have risen hugely over about 3 years. They do seem to have peaked. We kind of saw peak at kind of 6%, and that's now slipped down to about 5%. And if you look at longer term rates, we are looking at slipping back down towards more towards 4%, I think. But that's probably all you're going to get in kind of short-term deposits where you want to be able to spend that money within a year, or it might be money for next year. It's only when, in terms of investing, people talk about investing, but it's only investments where you would potentially make more money are long-term things that you're looking at in 5 and 10 years to make your money. And as I said at the start, we have seen people run up £1 billion debt because they thought they were going, or councils run up £1 billion debt rather than people, because they thought they had a good investment, which turned out not to be. So I think it's one of those things. You look at where is your money safe, and we can get back to it. And again, Icelandic banking, quite a few years ago now, big sums of money. Most people got their money back, but in some cases it took 5 to 10 years to disentangle that. So being able to get your money back and use it is kind of a critical thing, as Derek said, about having sufficient reserves.
Yeah,
The thing I would add to that,
yes.
It's very, very important to remember that the level of reward is directly related to the level of risk. You go for a high reward investment, you are inevitably increasing your risk. And risk with public money is something that should be severely limited, if not eliminated. So don't chase a high return, chase a secure and safe investment. The other thing to bear in mind is that to get higher rates of interest, you tend to need to invest longer term, and there are severe restrictions on how we can invest and the implications of investing to the level of our reserves. So beware in chasing higher rates of reward.
Thank you. Now, our next question, I think this is for everyone on the panel, really. How do you envisage the new procurement regulations affecting our sector? Who wants to go first on that one, about the new procurement regulations?
I'll give it a go. I would have to say, the Procurement Act, when it comes into force, and it hasn't even, I don't think we've even got a date yet. The suggestion was October. And it's been heralded as a major change, but I've looked through it and I find it very hard to pick out something that this is a different way of doing things. It completely replaces the old regulations, but in terms of the level at which you procure, you have to go out to tender, etc., the kind of tendering you do, etc., it's the same stuff in a different act, was my view when I looked through. Maybe I've missed something important, but that's how it felt. It does mean that we'll have to get used to referring to completely different bits of legislation. It does mean that the Public Contracts Regulations 2015 will be revoked, but it looks like we're going to get new regulations to replace them. And I think that's the sticking point. We have no idea what those regulations will look like until somebody puts a draft before Parliament. And obviously, putting things before Parliament this year is kind of a challenging timescale for reasons that we all know about.
Thank you. Derek, did you want to come in there? Derek, I think you're on mute at the moment. Okay, I'll move on to the next question then, unless Annie or Graham want to come in there. So I think I will move on to the next question. So this is saying, with 19 members, this town council is regularly challenged to cut costs. These come from double hatters, triple hatters, who are using the principal authority restrictions as a template for the town council. How do we deal with them? Some votes incur costs pushed down from the district council. Graham, is that something that you might be able to answer?
Well, I'm a twin hatter. I'm on Somerset Council, and of my 24 councillors, I think there's about 6 of us who are on Somerset Council. I think the advantage of having twin hatters is that we do have lots of information about what's happening elsewhere. However, when you step into the chamber, you're a town councillor, and you have to act in that way and in the best interest. I think that if you apply the approach that unitary and county councils have to apply at this time to a town council, fiscally, you're probably insane. They're so different, and the one is, I mean, I always describe it quite differently. The unitary council has a small list of things that it has to do, and 1 or 2 things it would like to do. The parish council can do almost anything, and I don't think we're allowed to raise an army, although there are some cheap tanks going at the moment. We can do anything, and there's a reason for that, because we don't provide massive services. We provide things that people need, sometimes for an individual, sometimes for a community. And twin hatters need to be able to think differently in different places, because, I mean, yesterday I was attended a meeting of Somerset Council in the afternoon. It was pretty dire. And then in the evening, a special meeting with our PRNF, where we were supporting a local organisation that had lost its grant funding from Somerset Council. So you do have to switch your brain differently where you are. And if twin hatters are applying one thing, the same set of rules everywhere they go, that's disappointing.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question, and this is for you, Steve. Could you update us on the progress of the financial regulations, and particularly the likely changes, please? Is that something you've already covered? You're on mute, Steve.
Sorry, I'm going to say to note that one, because I think it's way off topic for this forum, and I don't think it's fair for everybody else who didn't come to hear about financial regulations. They will be done when they're done, and when I give them to NALC, it's then up to NALC when they publish them. So I haven't got a time frame for that. They are coming shortly, is all I can say, and I'm certainly not going to try and go through all the changes, because they are very different.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question. Would anyone be comfortable suggesting a percentage of budget given in grants and funding to community groups, and something that should not be exceeded?
I think my answer to that would be no, because councils are so different. Some councils operate on the basis that, they give maybe 1/3 of their entire funding to support somebody else running a community centre, somebody else running a theatre, somebody else running youth services, and then they sit back and let them all do it, and they don't have to pay staff to manage those things. And other councils deliver those services themselves, and you have completely different models for running them. So I don't think you could say, if you provide everything yourselves and you only give the occasional bit out, even then it depends what you have got and what people are coming for. So I think it's a case of looking at how much, what can the council taxpayer afford to give to support local groups and again, looking at how vital are these local groups, what do they deliver to the community? You should be looking at your priority for spending the money rather than we're talking about capping in effect. What kind of cap shall we put on these people when we've just said we don't want to be capped?
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in there?
I think also it's important when considering any level of grant funding, both at the individual level and at the global level, to decide how that grant funding fits with the overall aims and policies of the council in question? Do they fit your vision for your local community? If they do, then a cap would be entirely inappropriate. Are they just a way of pandering to local interest groups? That raises an entirely different set of questions. So look at your vision before even thinking about whether you should place monetary limits on your grants.
We have two different types of grants. We have a service level agreement, for example, youth services. The old county council scrapped, I think 10 years ago, youth services in Somerset. And we fund through a couple of organisations, youth workers, and that's going really, really well. Service level agreements, so they know where they are, so they've got funding agreed for coming years. And we have individual grants. And for example, there's a chap in Yeovil, he's the world champion at Crown Green Bowls, and he's disabled, and he needed our support to be able to afford to go to South Africa to defend his title, and we gave him a small amount of money, and off he goes, and it'll be another successful Yeovilian.
Thank you, Graham. Al, I've got another question here. At what point should concurrent powers be reviewed? Perhaps in line at the time of the general power of competence? I don't know if this is a question for Steve or Derek.
I'm looking to see if Derek's going.
Yes.
Derek, you're on mute.
Derek's not on mute now. Sorry, my alt-A button wasn't working. Concurrent function funding is a discretionary power of principal authorities. It is not enforceable in any way, shape or form against principal authorities or by local councils. And in my experience over 20 plus years, it is a declining symptom of principal authority activities, probably largely coupled with their lack of funds available. So what should really be reviewed is not the concurrent function funding, but the whole question of what should be discretionary and what could be made mandatory.
Thank you, Derek. Steve, did you want to add anything there?
I think I'd agree with that. I mean, people have been waving it's like double taxation things for a long time, but the reality is the government sucked a huge amount of money over maybe 15 years or more out of local authorities generally, and the concept that there's enough money to pay for these things twice is no longer there. There's only enough money to pay for 50% of what we'd like to do, I suspect. And, this is it their responsibility as well. Principal authorities taking a very simple route. If we don't have to do it, we're dumping it on somebody else. And Graham has described perfectly how that works. So I think the idea of, who's got the funding for this, the answer is nobody. And I think everybody's struggling to make things work.
Thank you, Steve. I will move on to the next question now. That is, how can we ensure that principal authorities will undertake community governance reviews to ensure fairness, as Yeovil has? Graham, do you have any advice?
No, we haven't done it. We haven't, no. And I have to say, the councillors, in a sense, act as the directors, shall we say, of the company. To push a community governance review at this moment, when we're just taking over all those services and chipping all the staff and reorganising the council, it would be an interesting decision and not one I would support. However, our town is based on, like all parishes, or most parishes, historical boundaries based on, I don't know, 200-300 years ago. And 75% of the people of Yeovil live in Yeovil town. The other 25% live in Brimpton and Yeovil without. There are other bits, little villages. We need to go through that probably next year, a community governance review, so that people who live in Yeovil will actually live in Yeovil council area. it will make for better local government, make a stronger council. And I'm particularly worried at the moment, just to put dampers on things, I'm not convinced Somerset Council will survive, in the sense of, if the commissioners come in and do what commissioners do and cost what commissioners cost, Somerset is going to take a real kicking at that level. So parishes need to be stronger so that it can take over the services for the people that the people need locally. And anyone, you know, we're happy to talk to any other council if they want to see what we're doing and why. We have no choice. We have to save those services for our people.
Thank you, Graham. Now, I will move on to the next question. So this is for all panelists. What would you like a new government to do to sort out local government finance for the long term? Shall we start with yourself, Graham, as your
Well, firstly, don't mess with parish councils' limits on caps and any of that nonsense. I personally would like to move away from council tax to local income tax. I think that would be considerably fairer. If they're not going to do that, we have to have a revaluation, and we have to be able to have government support, because these days we're supporting the government, not the other way around. There should be government money for the services that people need, and critically, and this will become more important over the next few months for all the top level councillors. The government messed up social care, and created a problem where prices have increased dramatically, 45%, I think it was, in Somerset over the last 12 months in social care, and the government needs to fund it. We pay for people in the NHS when they're in hospital, but when they still need more care and they move into a nursing home, that falls on the local authority for a lot of those people, or the people themselves. The government needs to do something about social care. It needs to, it's a big bullet to bite, and it's not one that they're going to think about today because they're going to spend all their money on tanks.
Thank you, Graham.
I think it also needs to be recognised that social care is a national issue, should not be a local issue. It is inherently linked with the health service. It is not inherently linked with local services. And for goodness sake, engage in joined up thinking.
Please.
Derek, did you want to add anything else about what you'd like a new government to do to sort out local government finance?
I'd like them to remove their hand from the till of locally raised income.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
I think both the main taxes that now fund local authorities, I mean, if you go back 25 years when I last worked at Principal Authority, roughly half the money came from the government, 25% from council tax and 25% from business rates. That half has almost completely disappeared, and councils are now relying on business rates and council tax, both of which are vastly out of date. Council tax is inherently unfair. It's a regressive tax that hits people at the lower end far harder than it hits wealthy people. And to base it on the theoretical valuation of housing in 1989 is just bizarre in this day and age. So it's a really poor tax. We have lots of areas that suffer with the impact of second homes, the impact of people taking properties out of council tax and into making them holiday lettings in some places, which impacts on parishes because they don't get any of that money. But on the other side, business rates are still predicated on you pay big rates to be in the high street and you pay small rates to have a big barn next to a motorway. But actually, the people making all the money are the people with the big barns next to the motorway with their distribution centres, and high streets are becoming empty. So, it's going to be one of those taxation systems that the last person left is going to pay a massive bill, and when they go, we'll just turn the lights out, because we are going to kill our town centres, and we're going to just increase the amount of development of motorway junctions where people can put cheap factories, cheap distribution units and so on. So both, we need a better way of funding, whether it's a local income tax, whether it's a local property tax or whatever. it needs to be better, it needs to be fair, and the government needs to take its hand out of that pot. I mean, I fully accept, there are issues to redistribute between parts of the country like north and south and such, but it shouldn't be, a cash cow for anybody else to dip into.
Could I just come back in and say 2 points? Firstly, Somerset Council spending £36 million, giving it to the poorer people in our society, because that's the only way they can survive through the various housing payments and things like that. That's the scale of the problem. And the other thing is, the north-south thing? Has anybody heard of the southwest? Because we get nothing. We've got a railway line that goes from Exeter to London, and it's large parts of it are a single line. You have to train pulls over onto and waits for a train to come through. It was built by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and they've done nothing. Successive governments have done nothing. We have the A303 is taking forever to be dual. We don't get any investment. They take, they give very little to the southwest. The north always complains. But if you go to the north, some places have had serious investment. The southwest, I think, is the Cinderella of England.
Thank you, Graham. Annie, did you want to come in at all there?
Yes, my ambitions are rather less global. I would like the new government to prioritise the review of the purpose and effectiveness of local government audit. I'd like them to really make sure they understand why they're doing it, and then for the audit to follow that. And more generally, I think there should be greater recognition of the contribution of parish councils to the health and well-being of the nation. So mine are slightly more limited, but that's what I would like the new government to be doing.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So, first of all, how do we keep ahead of sudden changes or withdrawals by the Principal Council after a careful financial strategy has been adopted as part of budgeting? Steve or Derek, are you able to come in there?
Yeah, we see that. I've literally seen people, they've set their budget, they've published it, they've sent their precept in, and then they're kind of told in March, oh, by the way, we'd like to transfer this to you or something like that. It's like, I think it's poor communication. And that may be because principal authorities are struggling, they don't have resources and stuff gets missed. But it is kind of one of those things, if you want to offload something so somebody else takes the financial burden, you need to be having that conversation. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to shift that financial burden. So talking to them and talking at a high level as well as at a lower level, making sure that you understand, is there anything that the principal authority is talking about or thinking about that we need to budget for? I've seen leaders of principal authorities do this very, very well in engaging conversation. And sometimes it's hard, like, we want to dump this. I think the Isle of Wight did it. The Isle of Wight we're going to close all the public toilets unless you take them on. Full stop. That's the approach we're taking to be able to balance budget. And if they tell you in June and you think about it for setting your precept in December, January, that's great. If they tell you in March after you've set your precept, it's much harder. So making sure you're aware, and at county association level or at district level, making sure you're talking to your principal authorities and saying, is there anything you need to be telling us before we set our precept?
Thank you, Steve. Derek, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think it's far more a question of persuading the principal authorities to talk to us rather than us talking to them.
Great, thank you. Graham, did you want to come in there?
No, Steve and Derek summed it up.
Perfect, thank you. I will move on to, I think, one final question then. That is, given the financial challenges facing principal councils and the increasing need for parish and town councils to step up and take on more, does there need to be reform to the number of parish councils? For example, parish meetings and smaller parish councils, so that it results in fewer councils, but the councils that are there have greater capacity and capability?
That's a really good question. I think the capacity and capability is a really important thing because some councils just don't have the resources. A very small parish doesn't have the resources to suddenly pick up a grass cutting contract with people working on the highway and all the legal issues that things like that entail. Having said that, there are some superb small councils in the kind of £5,000 to £25,000 range that have their finger in every pie and do a lot by cooperation with their community. And the examples we have seen of councils not being able to pay their staff were at the quite sizable end where you would expect better from them. So whether turning everybody into, for example, we don't have any parishes less than £25,000 as a random number to pick, and we merge them all into bigger councils, would that give us better councils? Would that give us more robust, more strategic parish councils? I can't help suspecting that the answer to that is probably no. But certainly, I do wonder, when you have a parish council that spends £1,000 a year, is it really effective to have so many? There's probably 2,000 spend less than £2,000 a year. Is it really effective to expect those to be able to deliver stuff at that level? And I suspect the answer to that is no.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone else want to come in there?
I think it's a question of balancing the locality to the knowledge of local need to the size necessary to meet that need. And there is no one size fits all. Steve is quite right. Making bigger is not always better. Small is sometimes beautiful, but there is no simple answer, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Derek.
I'd say there's an issue around the parish meeting concept, and I think, unfortunately, I think there should be some level of merger. There are certainly some parishes, they hate the people in the next parish more than the French kind of thing. So you just can't go down that path. People have got to want to do it. But interestingly, Mudford, a little village just outside, before we put up our council tax this year, they were charging their residents more council tax than we were in Yeovil. And if you think of the services we were already providing. So there's certainly a time to look based on modern situations and growth and bringing some common sense to it. But don't mess with the really rural villages because it will go wrong.
Okay, thank you. So on a final note, could I ask you all to sum up by providing one bit of advice you would give to local councils to kind of protect against emerging financial threats? Starting with yourself, Derek.
Look at the level of your resources before you increase the level of the demand on them.
Thank you. Graham?
I'd invite Derek in to talk to us about how exciting reserves are, and how we have to make sure that we've got enough. I also think the thing to do at the moment maybe is to start thinking a bit outside the box, rather than traditional local government, and saying what opportunities are there that we can enhance services in different ways, whether that's trusts or whatever.
Thank you. Steve?
I think it's about resources as well, not just financial resources and reserve, but your staff. Have we got enough staff? Have we got the right staff? Have we got them properly trained to deal with all the stuff? And are they good communicators? A key thing at parish level is to be communicating with all the other bodies, the police, the principal authorities, health services, and being a conduit for your residents as well. So if you know what's going on, and again, it comes back to these surprises from the principal authority, knowing what's going on puts you in a much stronger position.
Thank you. And Annie?
I think great minds think alike. I'd written down invest in staff and their training, but not only the training of them, training of councillors too.
Perfect. And with that, I will say a huge thank you to our fantastic speakers today, Steve, Derek, Annie and Graham, for all your insightful and valuable contributions. Please do fill out our feedback form when it appears on screen. And our post-event mailing, which will go out to all attendees, will include the chat and any presentations you saw today. Once again, we would like to say a huge thank you to our partners for today's online event, CCLA, Clear Councils Insurance, and Bless Share Illuminations. And don't forget to check out our brilliant online events programme for events coming up through the summer. Thanks for joining today, and goodbye.